Hello, welcome back to the video lecture series for Introduction to Data Programming using Scala. In the last video, we looked at how we can use a Scala.io source to read from files, and we were reading what you might call fairly well-behaved files in there, where the data that we were interested on was all nicely arranged in lines, and not everything is going to be arranged that way. So I wanted to run through an example of reading a somewhat more complex CSV file, comma-separated values. So CSV is a standard text format that's used by a lot of programs, especially spreadsheets, to represent table structured data. So in particular, the data that I want to look at here is output by this website. It's Nod3x. This does data mining on Google Plus streams. And so, for example, if you type in Android and do a search, what this shows you is, so it'll generate a little plot and give us information about recent posts and activities related to the term Android on Google Plus. And so it just so happens that there's been a flurry of activities related to Android at the time when I'm recording this. And you can see, so there's been 40 different activities with a bunch of comments and different reshares and a lot of plus ones. And one of the reasons why I picked this is because it happens to have an option to download as a CSV, and the CSV file that produces is not necessarily simple. So if we go and we look, and I downloaded earlier two different files from there. One is on 3D printing. And of course, it turns out if you go to Nod3x, because it is only looking at recent posts, things change dramatically over time. You can see that we have this comma-separated values file. You can look at the top line here. The post ID, the author ID, the title, the commenter ID, the shared ID, and the +1 ID. There's this Control M down here at the end, and that winds up being significant in here because the way that they have stored their files, let's see if I can find an entry that has this in here. There we go. The way they have stored this, some of their text fields, so when in a full CSV, if something starts with a double quote, you have the so we have double quote here, and this field doesn't end until the double quote down here, and you can see this spans multiple lines. And so in addition to using the carriage return, they also use a line feed, and so the ends of full data lines include both, and that's going to be significant to us. In addition to looking at the file this way with VI, we can also look at it using a hex editor. And I'll pull up another one of my favorite topics, race against the machine. Let's pipe the XXD output to less. Now what XXD shows you, this is a hex editor, and so every 2 characters here is a single byte, and this gives you the hexadecimal. Here it shows you the character output, and so here you can see what's happening at the end of one of these lines, and so it turns out that that is that right there. There's a 0D and a 0A, which is 13 and 10 that are embedded in there. And if you go and you look for places where there were long quotes, let's see if we can find a long quote in here. Here we go. So this is a quote, and it goes all the way down to there. Embedded, like for example, right in through here, there are 0A's, okay? But there's not a 0D, 0A. Okay? So the 0D, 0A tells us that we're at the end of a data line, and just a 0A might not. And that's significant for us to know, because what I want to do is I want to write code that reads in these values. So let's go ahead and write this. Now, previously, we actually, and in fact, for probably most of the things that you'll do, you will be quite happy just making your new source and calling getLines. So if I import scala.io.source, and I want to def read CSV line, and I'm going to pass this a source. I'll call it src. Notice that I'm not passing an iterator of string, which is what lines would be. I'm actually passing it the source because I can't just read in the lines, well, I could, but I'm not going to go about writing the code that way. Because some of these things, read line would wind up breaking things apart. And I can't just use a simple split either, because if I split on commas, it turns out that you can embed commas in the middle of double quotes, and that's not supposed to be a change of field. So this file is a little bit harder to read, and what I'd like for this to return is an array of strings. And of course, when I call this at some point, let's say I wanted to read that 3D printing file. Actually, I think the Race Against the Machines has more multi-line comments, which will be helpful for us to see. So, equals source from file and give it the file name. Okay. So how is this going to work? Well, basically I need to read until I get to one of those control M's, a 0D in hex, or the value 13 as a character. Okay, so I need a while loop. I need to keep going while one of two things could stop me. One, it could be that I want to keep going while source is non-empty, and the character that I have read in, my most recent character, is not equal to 13. If you want, you can do 0xd. You can type this in however it makes sense to you, but that is the character that's being used in these files, and it's a standard DOS format for doing this to denote that that you've actually moved on to another data line. Okay, so I want to keep reading those things, and the idea is that when I'm done, I'm going to have some value at the bottom here that I can return. And so what do I need to do inside? Well, I've referred to this C, okay, and I haven't defined it yet. So how about we go in here, and I'm going to create a var named C, and well, I want this to be the first value that I read in to start with, and so there are two possibilities. So I could do just source.next, and that would give me the next character. Except what if you happen to call this when there is no next character? So just to be safe, okay, while source.hasNext, actually it might just make me feel a little bit better. Well, yeah. While source.hasNext, if we have a next, then I want this to be source.next. Else, I don't really care. I'll just make it a character of a space. Just something so that it doesn't cause me a problem. And I have some ret here. You know, I could make ret an array, and in the end I kind of will want ret to be an array, but I think that for the time being I'd rather build a list of strings, simply because of the fact that lists have the ability to easily cons onto them. I don't know how many fields there are going to be in here. I don't know how big this array should be, so it's easier for me to read them into a list, and then when I'm done with the list, convert that list to an array. Okay, so what needs to happen in here? Well, there are some different things, so there are a number of different characters that are significant to us. Let's go ahead and just comment on them. One is a comma. When you see a comma, you need to finish whatever it is what you're reading right now and go on to the next field, with the proviso that you can't be inside of quotes. If you're inside of quotes, the comma doesn't count as a delimiter. Okay, so that's one of the things that we need to worry about. Another thing that we need to worry about is the presence of double quotes. Okay, because when we see a double quote, that means that we have a string, might span multiple lines. I want to pull off the double quotes, and I want to remember that I'm in quotes so that I can not interpret commas in the way that I normally would. It's tempting to just say everything else here, but actually there is one other thing that, just to be complete, you know that in Java or in Scala we have to escape various things. So for example, \n is a new line. Well, in the CSV you can also escape things. For example, if you want a double quote inside of your double quotes, you can escape it. So I want to treat my escape in a special way too. Okay, so now that I've kind of outlined the different cases that I need to have, let's go ahead and let's put in some if statements, and we'll figure out what additional variables we need to have in there as well. So what if the character that I read was a comma? Well, as we said, if it's a comma and I'm inside of quotes, I don't care. So I only care if it's a comma and not in quotes. Well, this doesn't exist yet. How about we define it? Let's make a var called in quotes, and it starts off as false. You do not begin, when you start off reading a line, you have not seen quotes yet. I'm good with that. So what would happen if I saw this here? Well, then I would need to append something onto my list. I would need to say ret cons equals, and that cons equals is short for ret equals ret, or is equal to something cons ret. It's just like using plus equals as a shortcut for incrementing. Turns out you can take any operator you want and put an equals after it, and it gives you that same type of a shortcut. So what do I want to cons onto here? Well, I want to cons on whatever word I've been building up. So I need to have a variable for the word that I'm building up. And I'll call it cur, and it's going to start off as an empty string. Okay, so this is the current word that I'm building up. And after I add that onto the list, I need to remember to set it back to the empty string, because we've just found a full field, we've added it on, it will become one of the elements in our array, and now we're working on the next thing. So what's next? Okay, so we've dealt with the comma case. What if it's a quote? Else if C is equal to a quote, and notice that I'm backslashing my quote here. Well, in this case there are two possibilities. One possibility is that I am in the quotes, in which case I need to not be in the quote, and if I'm out of the quotes I need to be in the quotes. Well, that's two possibilities, but in both cases all I'm doing is I'm changing the state of in quotes to be the opposite of what it currently is. Okay, so I'm just going to set in quotes equals to not in quotes. So the first time I see it, it will take the false that we had up here and it will set it to be true. And the next time we see it, we'll set it back to be false. And that will repeat back and forth. Backslashes. So, and this might look a little bit odd to you, but I have to backslash my backslash, because remember the Scala sees a regular backslash as being an escape character, so I have to backslash it. What do I see if I get a backslash? Well, that's just going to mean that the next character should be treated, especially it should be treated as it is, and so I am simply going to say that my current string, I'm going to append onto it the next thing from the source. So whatever follows that backslash, I'm just automatically going to add it onto my string. And then my last case, if it's none of those, well then it's just a nice character that I want to append onto my source, And after I've done all of these things, I should read the next thing from my source. C equals source dot next. Okay. So we declare a number of different variables here. While the source has more stuff and we haven't gotten to a character 13, we check for a comma while we're not in quotes, and if we find one, we append this to, or we prepend it to the list of things we're returning, and we set our current value that we've been reading back to empty. If we get a quote, we flip the state of our in quote variable. If we get a backslash, we just skip to the next character and append it onto the result. And if it's anything else, we just append the character that we read onto the result, and then we pull off the new character. Yeah. When we get done with this, it turns out we still have a current. So for example, if you had a line that only had one value in it, then it wouldn't have any commas at all. So we would just build up a current value, and we would need to wind up appending that. And the last thing, or prepending, and the last thing is, because we're prepending, this list is going to be in the wrong order. So I want to reverse it. So I reverse the list, and then I convert that to an array. And so to see if this works, let's just do, how about we do it this way? I want to print the whole file. While source dot has next, I could use non-empty. Print line of read CSV line from source, and it's an array, so it won't print nicely, but we can do a make string on it and put some common delimiters in there. In fact, we can put comma and space just to possibly make it look a little bit better. And we can run our program. Oh, I have a that's not supposed to be C. What should this be? This should be cur. Okay. That line should match this one up here, where we're adding our current value on. And bingo. And so that was a lot of stuff. Let's print this out this way. So you can see here, I got my first line. Now note that there's a blank line in here. Right now it turns out this +1 or ID is also getting the new line character that's at the end there. So that's something you might want to put in a special case where if when you get down here to the bottom, actually, let's try this. That bothers me a little bit, but actually, nah, I'm willing to be bothered by it. Leading spaces will be deleted, and all of our trailing spaces will be deleted too. You could go through and check to see, actually, how about I do that? Cons equals cur dot filter underscore not equal to 10. So the last entry, I'll take out all the new lines. I really only want to take out the last new line. You can play with what you do there. That didn't. I'll just leave it equal to cur. You can play with how you want to pull off that new line at the end. But what matters to us the most is if we come down here, you can find places like this where there's a significant amount of blank space in there, and that is one single field in that. This particular data file has things that are, that looks like garbage in some ways, but it's part of a URL into Google+, and so you could analyze this a bit more and find some information for what's going on with posting inside of Google+. But for this video, all I wanted to show you was the reading and how you can use a straight source and pulling individual characters to read things and parse through things that are a little bit more complex. So that's it for this video, and we'll come back next time and we'll see how sometimes you might want to go to a non-Scala based library and use, for example, Java's scanner to read through files.